Hello everyone, and thanks very much for all the support with my videos. I'm very grateful. Today I want to speak about censorship in Ireland. This has been a long running topic due to the EU Digital Services Act and many more pieces of legislation being brought forward by the Irish government at the behest of the European masters in terms of restricting freedom of expression. And we've seen this happen quite a number of times in the recent past. In terms of what's happened across the water in Britain over the last few days, we've seen a lot of people being charged for retweeting stuff. And this has huge impacts for freedom of expression, which is a basic democratic right, a basic tenet of living in the Irish Republic as well, which is part of our constitution. But it's important because this has always been pushed forward by the Irish political establishment, in particular over the last number of months. We tried to pursue this through the Dublin riots that took place last November, where there was an attempt to invoke emergency legislation to restrict social media companies from getting the news out there on various topics and getting a different point of view as well. To a massive extent, social media companies have democratised people getting their point of view out there, and a counterweight essentially to the mainstream narrative that's been pushed forward at the behest of the political establishment here in Ireland and many places across the European Union. And the context of this Digital Services Act that has been pushed forward in the last few months has huge ramifications for freedom of expression. This was pursued through the European Commission, where all legislation is enacted at the behest of big corporate lobbyists, and then would be pushed through the European Parliament and the Oireachtas. And now they're trying to push heavy fines on people and companies as well for not abiding by the regulations and by the rules. We've seen that happen with TikTok. We've also seen it happen now with X, most recently with Elon Musk being targeted because of expressing different points of view on his platform as well. Now, of course, this would have huge ramifications in Europe between the Eurocrats, where the Digital Services Act will change the balance of power versus the big tech companies in terms, and that has huge ramifications for Ireland, obviously, of course, because we are a huge amount of big tech companies have the European headquarters in Ireland. And not to mention we have the Commission which has replaced the Broadcasting Authority. And this is very apt because what's happened in this instance is that they're trying to push the whole agenda around disinformation and misinformation. So anything that would counter the mainstream narrative would be pursued as being, or viewed as being, misinformation. But again, this is more of the same nonsense that the mainstream narrative and establishment want to push at people as well. And huge amount of money has been transferred in towards the Commission so-called Truth Ministry. Around this, you have huge offices up in a very exclusive part of Dublin, Shelburne Road, and a huge budget in place as well to pursue their Ministry for Truth agenda. And also RTE, which are in receipt of over 725 million over the next 3 years to pursue the state's narrative as well, are now looking for a disinformation reporter over the next number of months also as well. And this is very important because even politically, the Oireachtas Committee in the last number of months has one of them has decided to try and clamp down on various amounts of so-called hate speech. Now, there's no so-called hate speech that's being pushed forward. There's no definition of what hate is. So if you can't define something, how then is it possible to prosecute or charge somebody? They're already under the statute books and incitement to hatred legislation, which can be extended in terms of pushing forward, in terms of protections for people, the criminal sanctions as well. But of course, this is more of the same narrative that will just try and clamp down on dissent, and it's particular to what's gone on in our society most recently, especially around immigration. And it also has huge issues. In particular, we've seen it over the last couple of weeks in Ireland, where we saw an horrific attack, for instance, on a priest of the Defence Forces, the Irish Defence Forces, which was absolutely despicable and desperate. And immediately some of the mainstream media start saying it was a jihadist Islamic reference to this as well. And maybe they were looking for a response off the people to react to this as well, much the same to what happened across the water as well. But there wasn't a reaction obviously to it. But again, at the same time, there is elements to try and push forward an attack on our basic rights again, because it's important to note regarding this. I think what's really important is the fact that the narrative coming from Simon Harris has been about the far right extremism in Ireland and the terrorist threat through far right, whatever that is, in Irish society. But again, this is the same stuff that's been pushed forward by the Irish political establishment time and time again. For anybody that has legitimate concerns with what's going on in Irish society in terms of the huge pressure on services due to the immigration chaos, the huge pressure that's carrying on today, not far away from here on the Grand Canal, where we see over 40 tents. We see huge amounts of people claiming international protection, 2,500 people without a home, not to mention the huge amount of people here in Ireland, the homeless crisis which has preceded the immigration chaos as well. So these are big issues in Ireland, and what's generally being used is when a problem is caused by political establishment who bow down to the European masters and work for the globalists. When they abdicate their responsibility to those masters, they create the problem, and then problem due to neoliberal policies with lack of services and deregulation and privatisation of basic social and public services, it then becomes issues and problematic for them, and then the solution would be for them to clamp down on people's rights because people are fearful, people are angry about what's going on, and it demonstrates really the lack of democracy, the really stark lack of democracy here in Ireland, which is very important to note, because people feel powerless, people feel like they don't have a voice or don't have a say in what goes on, and when that happens, that leads to a lot of anger, a lot of fear, and people that then as well who are left behind in terms of policies through immigration. We've seen that with the immigration policies, but also with policies due to the privatisation of our housing, privatisation agenda through health service, which excludes so many people in Irish society. This has catastrophic implications for the social fabric of the country. But again, the rich are getting richer, and more divides and inequality is being created in Irish society. But we need to build an Ireland for the people, by the people, where people have a say in what goes on, people have a voice to what goes on, and put the needs of people first in terms of the policies of the state. The resources of the state are at the hands of ordinary people of the state, and not any bureaucrats in Brussels that serve the interests of the big global corporations and the billionaires. So thanks a lot for supporting my videos, really appreciate them. Thanks for likes, shares and comments, I'm very grateful. And from Dublin, Slán, talk to you all soon. Bye bye.